from a schools background, so I guess my approach is mainly from a practitioner point of view, and the kinds of lessons we've started to learn in this space of digital writing, and hopefully we can humbly contribute a few ideas towards this think tank that we're going to have over the next time. It is an exciting time because we do have a role in encouraging schools to look more closely at their digital technologies and their digital capabilities. Just in case you hadn't seen what the students are asked to do, they're given a prompt, a bit like the paper one, but in this situation they can listen to the prompt as well. So it's reading, viewing and listening as much as they need to. And students are given writing pane, they call it, where they construct their response. And you see this lovely toolbar up here at the top that we hope the students don't get too distracted by, but it does add a completely new dimension to their writing when you suddenly have all of these other icons that you can engage with. And we know that this is timed writing, okay? So we know that students are given a really difficult task. I've tried myself to write a good story in 40 minutes. It's very challenging. And they can move back to the prompt anytime they like. So they can move back between those two. We've already said lots of times this afternoon that there is a strong link with the Australian curriculum, and this is just the English curriculum alone. You see in foundation we have even in the foundation year we have the introduction of word processing. Right through up to year 5 is the first year level at the moment where students write digitally, with quite a substantial statement there about what students in year 5 can do, particularly if they've started in prep. I did want to acknowledge though our fantastic teachers and the dilemmas they do have between what the curriculum document actually says and the actual enactment in the classroom. We know that there's a lot of things that can get in the way. Teacher time, the amount of curriculum areas they're teaching, availability of resources, all of those things are issues that teachers grapple with in this space, and I did want to acknowledge that. The first thing I'd like to think about is what's different when you're writing digitally in the way you might plan your thinking. We know that students, when they're handwriting, they could be doing concept maps, they could be doing bullet points. Schools use lots of different methods for students to map out ideas. And in the online environment, in NAPLAN Online, there's no concept maps. You know, you can do bullet points and you can plan on the screen, but it's a very different approach to planning when you have a screen in front of you than on paper. And it is one of the things that teachers will need to understand. Akara says in their study that when handwriting compositions, students typically make use of pre-writing skills such as drafting and outlining. However, when students use word processing tools, they tend to use fewer pre-writing skills and instead opt to revise and write on the go, so to speak, and use the revision tools that are in the software. So it is a space that teachers have to think about when we're moving to this digital approach to writing. And we also know how important planning is, this important part of our writing phase. This is probably my main point, if I could emphasize any point, that when I talk to teachers, I talk about writing as thinking. Okay, so we're not just talking to the English teachers, we're talking to all of our teachers. How does writing represent our thinking? And writing is composing, and it is editing digitally. And the point I'm trying to make is that a lot of schools will say to me, yeah, our students do word processing once a term in about week 8, they type up their final draft. And I would argue the cognitive load involved in thinking, composing and editing digitally is very different to the cognitive load of just transcribing something. And so are we giving our students that opportunity to, in their thinking space, to be thinking in a digital space? And that's quite a challenge for schools to make that shift in our thinking. I love this one. I did my own research on this. Suddenly in NAPLAN online, they have to do this weird thing. They have to write digitally without autocorrect. And this is just fascinating to me, because the more research I did into it, the more I realised I understood very little about what was being autocorrected when I type. I was amazed by all the things it was picking up, because when you suddenly type in a situation where, you know, typos, you don't realise, but that's, you know, if you say I before E the wrong way around, it'll just correct it. You don't even know. So this is a fascinating area, and what I'd like to put forward is this idea of the habits you form are around the time you learnt your word processing and what the software was doing at that time. And what I mean by that is I'm a word perfect, kind of 98 kind of guy. And back then, I definitely had to go shift capital to start a sentence, right? And to this day, my habit is I go shift capital. But every teenager at my school says, why would you bother? You hit full stop, it automatically capitalises the next letter, except in NAPLAN online. So it's interesting that, and there's lots of arguments then about what we should be assessing, etc. I'm not going to get into that today. But the more I looked at this space, it is quite fascinating, the habits we're in when we're word processing and the impact that has on the way we edit our work and the way we engage with the screen. Because that whole typing, looking up, looking down is very different to handwriting, where we're just, you know, our scanning is just on a piece of paper. What I did was I had 700 students at my school, so I read all 700 scripts as a bit of a research, you know, thing in a school, and I discovered capitalisation was a major issue, because students don't go shift capital anymore. That's not what they do. The common typos, you know, where you haven't quite hit the space bar properly and all these words are stuck together, that's a new thing in the digital space for editing. Days of the week, didn't realise, are always automatically capitalised for you. Apostrophes, students who don't know the difference between a comma and an apostrophe. So what we're seeing in all the scripts is all these commas, because they don't know how to go shift for apostrophes. So when they handwrite, they know how to do an apostrophe, but that little ICT skill is going to impact on their ability to write in this online space. Oh wow, it's really sensitive, isn't it? So yeah, there's rules going on in the background is my point, and getting students to think very overtly about what's going on is a challenge. What I did was, this is not the saviour of these problems, but I came up with a checklist of the things students need to think about differently when they're editing in an online environment without autocorrect. This is not an English teacher's checklist. These are all the things that I just thought of that I discovered then. Words stuck together, commas in the wrong place that should be apostrophes. The best one, they all say I with a little I. No one goes shift I. Love that one. That was over everything. I'd like to just highlight, how do we edit our work when we write online? I'd like you to just reflect for yourself when you sit down to type a document. Are you the kind of person that you edit as you go and you're learning as you go? So are you looking at your hands and looking at the screen and constantly editing your work and neatening it up, so when you kind of get finished, you know, you've typed that parent letter home, you know it's in good shape? We see a lot of students when they've moved from paper to online who still kind of think like paper. They leave the editing to the last 2 minutes of the test. They put their head down and they just type and they never look up. So an error that they might have made early on, they don't learn from it. They wait for the last 2 minutes where arguably it's too late to go back and edit your work. So this idea of repeating mistakes, rushing editing, it's interesting, isn't it? To start to think about how the kids need to edit differently. And the other point that's coming through is that students are saying they were more easily able to read back their own work online. When they've got their own handwriting and it's all scribbled out, even just reading it back to do any proofreading is really challenging. But they're really enjoying the fact that online, at least they can see, and the markers are really enjoying, that they can at least see what letters are being formed and what words are intended. As I said right at the beginning, the obvious, all of a sudden, you've got text alignment button. Okay, so do students know we just need to left align our text? We don't need to center align it. Do we go crazy with bold and italics, or do we teach the students that they're only for special reasons that we would use those icons? Do we know how to cut and paste? There's even bullet points and numbering. Well, okay, when do we number? When is it appropriate? In what genres should we use numbers? These are new things that we would need to consider. It's really sensitive. And what I did at my school was I did a little research task on all our students that were below benchmark writers. And I've put on the one page an example of writing. This was from the real NAPLAN test. And the same student in a digital environment, so that I could just start to actually understand what might be happening for those students. And a few things. When they were typing, we see 200 words compared to 72 words. And that was common, particularly with boys. They were much more engaged and excited about working in a digital space than they were about picking up a pencil, okay? But it highlights some of the issues I was talking about. This student doesn't realise that the text wraps. They keep hitting enter to start a new line. And then you look at it and think, well, is there any real paragraphing there? How do we show paragraphing in an online environment? And then you can look more closely at it. There's much more connectives. There's much more, that was good. There's more connectives like but, because. So there's a whole range of learning schools can get by just comparing what students do when they're handwriting. You can see that the primary schools teach really well that you leave a blank line for a paragraph. They do it really well. But then how does that translate into an online environment? And I went as quick as I could because I only had 15 minutes. But there's my contact details, and I'm really interested in just starting a dialogue around this space, and interested in joining the researchers and other practitioners to understand a little bit more about what goes on cognitively and in that learning space with online writing. So I hope that was helpful for everybody this afternoon. So thank you.